is as you stand up close to it, you can almost see there's no real definitive lines between the different shades. It almost blurs into from a dark colour into a light colour, as you can see here and up, and around the eyes as well. You don't want real sharp contrasting of colours that differentiate. That there, it's almost like when you look at a photograph up close, you can see the pixels, and I try and sort of get that effect because most people will be looking at this from probably about 20, 30 yards away. And the further you stand back, the more realistic it's going to look. I try to get that effect, try to get as close to a picture, a photo, as I can.
It brought it up quite strongly today because of the new mural being put up, and it's very well done. It's a good depiction of Caroline, but also because, you know, listening to Claire speaking, it brought the memories back quite sharp, albeit she was talking about a longer period of time. It brought for me back very sharply the memory of that particular week and the subsequent time that followed.
Imagine the panic as she ran from her home to cradle her child as she lay dying on the ground. Imagine the heartbreak as the family kept the vigil beside her hospital bed while she remained on a life support machine. Imagine the utter devastation when that life support had to be switched off.
There was a mural here for many, many years, but it was destroyed in a storm in the winter, and half of it came down in the storm, and it was very upsetting to Caroline's mummy, who lives in this house here, to look out her window every morning and see just half of her face. So we removed the whole mural and told her that we would replace it around the time of her anniversary, which fell this week on the 22nd of May.
There's people always constantly, there's always people within the community, as I say, commemoration committees and things like that, that'll always be looking to commemorate when it comes around till certain events, anniversaries. And they'll always like to do some wee events to constantly keep things in the public domain and people can understand that these things happen, especially younger people up and coming who maybe weren't around or old enough at the time when some of these things happen. Yeah. So as they can constantly have a continuity of memory there. And also to let people from outside the area know and remember some of the events that happened.
So I was sitting in the flat and there was still no sign of her name was Christine, coming back, and the next thing I heard, a lot of banging and a lot of commotion, and it seemed to go quiet then for a bit, and then a couple of minutes later I heard, because it was on an upstairs flat, I heard footsteps running up the steps, and I opened the door, and it was a wee girl from across the street starting saying, "Oh, come on, Eileen, your Caroline's been shot, she's dead." So I come running down the street. I don't even know if I left anybody with that child, but I know she's fine today. So but I come running down anyway, and I got down, and people had started to gather out and about in the street, and Caroline was lying just outside here. So she was just up a couple of yards, about 5-6 yards up from our gate to come in. I remember clearly seeing her. Now, since then people said there was a lot of blood in that. I don't remember seeing any blood. I just remember seeing my sister lying on the ground because she had long hair with her hair found out behind her.
It was very normal for British Army or IC to be driving around, and they had their plastic bullet guns out through the windows. Which would have been normal. People would have been walking about, you know, doing their own thing. But I think they fired a few plastics at a couple of people.
What happened was that at the end of this block of houses here, there was a house shop, and Carol Ann was going to get a pint of milk for an elderly neighbour. As she was returning up this alley behind me, with the milk, 2 jeep loads of Royal Fusiliers came into the area and began firing plastic bullets, one of which hit Carol Ann on the back of her head.
The police was being called for. There was people saying the ambulance wasn't being allowed in. The ambulance had been sent back. People were phoning back to the Royal Victoria Hospital. They said they'd dispatched, and the army had told them there was nothing going on at the time, and it was just rumour. So Carol Ann seemed to lie there for a long time, and obviously more and more people started to come into the streets, and more army presence became obvious around.
The ambulance arrived, but the Royal Fusiliers refused to let the paramedics gain access to Carol Ann, and there was a bit of an argument went on between the paramedics, as they said that they are an emergency service. They did receive a call to come as a young child had been shot, and they were insisting that they were able to get to the child. Eventually, after much arguments, they let the paramedics in to give Carol Ann some treatment, and they removed her to the hospital, and she was on a life support machine, but sadly it was switched off on the 22nd of May when Carol Ann lost her life.
That's some way what makes me quite angry in a lot of ways. It actually says on her death certificate she died from pneumonia. Yeah. And not even clearly stated due to the fact that she'd been shot in the head with a plastic bullet and the drugs that she was on to reduce the swelling of the brain caused pneumonia, which caused her subsequently to die.
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, the more I talk about this, the more angry I feel. I feel angry after 27 years. I still feel very, very angry about what happened, about how they were allowed to get away with it. I mean, I could talk to you for a very, very long time about the inquest, the timing of the inquest, the fact that it was, you know, a year later to her birthday, before the inquest was heard, the carry on in the court, the army blowing my sister kisses, and when she objected to this, us being threatened to be removed from the court, being threatened by being held in contempt of court, and then the coroner's ultimate verdict, Coroner Elliott, that 3 or more people in Northern Ireland constitute a riot, and even though there didn't appear to be at that time civil unrest, that he could understand the army may have felt under threat by these 3 young girls and therefore had a right to fire.
There have been several inquiries into many people who were shot, but no British soldier has ever done any time or been found guilty of murder through plastic bullets.
A friend had wrote to Margaret Thatcher, a friend of my mother's, basically asking for some explanation as to why the death of Carol Ann was allowed to go unheeded. And the response that she got, that she was very sympathetic towards my mother's pain and the family's pain and that there, but really these boys were here, you know, and they were faced with danger and they had to do what they needed to do to protect themselves. They needed to murder a 12-year-old child to protect themselves? I don't think so. You know, so there's just so many questions. I find it truly, truly hard to believe that so-called decent, respectable people continued to turn their head away from the murder of very obviously innocent people. And as Claire said at times, that it actually was filmed and shown clearly that it was a murder. And sure, we're only Northern Irish, who's going to worry about us?
What is it to have a new mural on the wall there? What does it mean to you and to your family?
It means a lot. It means Carol Ann. I mean, Carol Ann will never leave our hearts. Us as a family, we all have photographs of her, say we all talk about her. But it's also clear, you know, to the community, and we've got murals and things of lots of people who died through the Troubles. But people do need to be reminded that innocent people died. And unfortunately, quite often it was the most vulnerable that suffered in this country, and they can't be forgotten any more than those who may be deemed to be heroes.